20 of America's finest doctors gave up, but the quiet woman who mopped the floors saved the soul of a dying billionaire. Manhattan, New York. Hartwell Biotech Tower, 42nd floor. Benjamin Hartwell, a world-renowned biotech CEO worth $14 billion, sat frozen behind a wall of glass. His eyes were blank, like a painting scrubbed of all color, gazing through the gray winter skyline. His breath was slow, his pulse steady. But his spirit had begun to drift, unnoticed by everyone around him. Private physician, executive assistants, wellness consultants. All of them failed to see it. Benjamin had no fever, no chest pain, no organ failure. But he was fading, day by day, like a flower turning from the sun. 36 days ago, he began missing key meetings. 21 days ago, he stopped eating dinner. 7 days ago, he no longer responded to his own name. And today, when the nutritionist quietly entered and called, "Mr. Hartwell," he didn't flinch. Only one person lingered long enough to truly see him. Natalie Brooks, the janitor on the evening shift. A woman with dark hair, soft brown eyes, worn canvas shoes, and a handmade bag stitched with quiet pride. She had scrubbed the 42nd floor for 4 years, never once meeting his eyes. But today, with the office door ajar, she paused, left her mop in the hallway, and stood silently, breathing in the sterile cold of a room that cost more than she earned in a year. No one knew Natalie once studied nursing, a path abandoned after her mother died untreated. Her mother, a Cherokee healer without insurance, left Natalie something greater than a diploma: the gift of listening. Not to symptoms, but to the soul. Natalie looked at Benjamin. His hands trembled faintly, though his face remained calm. It wasn't the look of physical illness. It was the look of someone quietly trying to leave the world. A light blinked on his desk. His private doctor had just left after a 12-minute consultation that ended with, "Everything looks fine. Probably stress." Stress? Natalie glanced at the photo frame beside the blinking light. A teenage boy with a bright smile, blonde hair, and a violin resting on his shoulder. The inscription read, "Ethan, 2005 to 2021. She had dusted that frame every Tuesday for 4 years. It never moved. That night, Natalie didn't go home. She stood by the service exit behind the tower, arms wrapped around her canvas bag, staring up at the glowing 42nd floor. She didn't know why, only that she couldn't walk away. The next morning, floor 48, executive boardroom. Benjamin was escorted in, his body thinner, eyes dimmer. He sat down wordlessly as the quarterly review began. Voices echoed numbers, projections, a new partnership in Munich. Then suddenly, Benjamin collapsed forward onto the table, his forehead striking a glass of water. Papers scattered. Panic erupted. Natalie, cleaning a nearby glass wall, rushed in. She didn't scream. She didn't ask, "Has anyone called 911?" She simply looked into his face. Her fingers trembled as she touched his forehead, cool to the touch, but not cyanotic. His pulse was there. This wasn't cardiac arrest. It wasn't a stroke. It was something deeper, a spirit retreating. A guard shoved her. "You're not authorized to be here." Another snapped. "Who let her near him?" Natalie stood her ground, whispering under her breath, unheard by the crowd. "He's not dying from sickness. He's dissolving from the inside out." That afternoon, Benjamin was admitted to the Mount Sinai Medical Center's high-priority observation unit. His vitals remained stable, but he did not wake. Dr. Phillips exhaled and said quietly to the executive board, "There's no medical cause. His organs are functional, but his will to live has shut down." Once again, they were helpless. Except Natalie. That night, under the soft gold glow of the hospital's emergency corridor lights, Natalie returned. Wearing a borrowed nurse's coat, she snuck past the janitor's entrance, pushed her mop cart down the hall, and entered his room. From her bag, she removed a small bottle of lavender mint oil, passed down from her mother's healing days on the Cherokee Reservation. She placed a single drop on his pillow, then sat beside his bed, took his frail hand, the hand that once signed billion-dollar deals, and held it gently. "Benjamin," she whispered, "you're not dying from illness. You're dying because you never cried for your son." The heart monitor beeped, once, sharply, a shift in breath. Then, for the first time in days, his eyes opened. Slowly, like curtains drawn back after years of dusk. He looked at her, their eyes locked, and he rasped, voice rough as stone, "Natalie?" Her chest ached. He remembered her. After 4 years, the most powerful man she'd ever met, finally said her name. Benjamin Hartwell did not speak for 23 minutes after waking up. The nurses checked his vitals. Dr. Phillips rushed in, calling for scans and cardiac panels. Technicians wheeled in portable ECG machines and brain monitoring equipment. All of it surrounded him like a wall of sterile white noise. But Benjamin only stared, not at the machines or at the doctors, but at the far window, where gray clouds were curling like smoke over Manhattan. Natalie had quietly stepped back when the staff flooded in, vanishing into the corner like she'd never been there. But Benjamin knew. Even as wires were taped to his chest and monitors beeped rhythmically in the background, his first words, when he finally spoke, were, "She was here, wasn't she?" Dr. Phillips paused. "Sir?" Benjamin's eyes shifted slowly across the room. "Natalie. She was here." A strange silence fell, the kind that made even trained professionals glance at one another. "Do you know someone named Natalie?" the doctor asked, cautiously. Benjamin didn't answer. He just closed his eyes, lips parting faintly as if something fragile had been disturbed deep within, something he hadn't allowed to surface in years. It was after midnight when Natalie found herself sitting on a bench outside the hospital chapel. Her borrowed scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and old cedar. She hadn't meant to stay, but her legs refused to move. The wind from the Hudson carried the scent of salt and city steel, rust and memory. She thought of her mother. "The body speaks even when the mouth cannot," her mother once said, especially then. Her mother had called it the fracture of the spirit, a sickness that no blood test could detect and no scan could name. Natalie had seen it once before, in her mother's final days, when no medication worked, but a single story, told gently, could ease a night of agony. Natalie believed Benjamin Hartwell was suffering from that same silent illness. And unlike the cardiologists or neurologists upstairs, she didn't need a degree to see it. 2 days later, Benjamin was discharged with no official diagnosis. "Stress-induced neurovegetative state," the report read. "Recommend therapeutic leave of absence and psychiatric follow-up." But he didn't go home. He returned to his penthouse on the 58th floor of Hartwell Tower, a cold, cavernous space of marble floors and soundproof walls. The rooms echoed. He opened his fridge. Empty. He turned on the TV. Muted. He sat on the edge of his bed and opened a drawer. Inside was a single photo. Ethan, age 16, laughing at something just out of frame. his violin bow caught mid-air. Benjamin stared at it for a long time, then placed it face down. He didn't sleep that night. Natalie returned to work as if nothing had happened. No one mentioned the incident. No one acknowledged her presence during the collapse. But something shifted. People looked at her differently. The cleaning supervisor gave her easier shifts. A receptionist smiled. But Natalie didn't feel different. She still carried her mop, still wore her thrift store sneakers, still took the subway back to her tiny one-bedroom in the Bronx, where a wind chime by the window sang to no one. What changed was the feeling, the quiet awareness that somewhere above her, far above, he remembered her name. 4 days later, Natalie was cleaning the executive hallway again when she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, and there he was, Benjamin, standing, alone. He wasn't in a suit, just a gray sweater, jeans, and eyes that looked heavier than the first snow. Natalie froze. "I remembered," he said quietly. She didn't answer. "You said I'm dying because I never cried for my son," he continued, voice soft, almost breaking. "You were right." She swallowed, her mop still gripped in her hand like a shield. "I never went to his funeral," Benjamin admitted. "I funded the research. I donated to youth mental health programs. But I never stood over his grave. I never let myself believe he was gone." Silence stretched between them like glass. Then Natalie did something no one had done for Benjamin Hartwell in years. She looked at him without pity, not like a patient, not like a man broken, just a man trying to find his way back from something too heavy to carry alone. And she said, "That's why your body's quitting. It's tired of holding your grief in silence." That night, Benjamin sat alone in his kitchen, the echo of her words ringing inside him. He searched symptoms of psychosomatic decline and ended up down a rabbit hole of psychology forums, grief therapy papers, and Cherokee healing traditions. At 2:14 a.m., he closed his laptop and did something unimaginable. He wrote an email to Natalie Brooks. Subject: "Tomorrow would you go with me? I don't know how to start, but I think I need to see his grave." The reply came an hour later. Subject: "Yes, I'll bring lavender." The lavender was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a strand of twine. Natalie held it close as they rode in silence through Brooklyn, the city blinking past the window in gray and rust-colored blur. Benjamin sat beside her in the back of the car, shoulders stiff, hands clenched in his lap like a man on trial. They didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the air between them had changed. It had shifted from tension to reverence, like the quiet before entering a sacred space. As they passed the wrought iron gates of Greenwood Cemetery, Benjamin's breath grew shallow. "I've never been here," he murmured. "Not once." Natalie turned to him. "Do you want to wait in the car?" He shook his head. "No. If I don't walk, I won't feel it." They stepped into the vast green space, where ancient trees whispered in the morning wind, and headstones tilted like silent witnesses of grief. Birds chirped high in the elms. A breeze tugged gently at Natalie's coat. Benjamin followed her up the hill, past family plots and small angel statues. He was slower now, thinner than a man his age should be, but his steps never faltered. Lot 12, Section 87. There it was. Ethan Hartwell, 2005, 2021. Beloved son, unfinished song. A small granite stone, flat, simple. Just as Ethan would have wanted. No marble, no gilding, just a quote etched beneath his name. There is no silence deep enough to contain a child's unfinished song. Benjamin stopped. His throat clicked. Then his knees buckled. Natalie caught him by the elbow before he could fall. Gently, she lowered him to the grass. The lavender slipped from her fingers and landed at the base of the grave. Benjamin didn't cry. Not yet. He simply stared at the name, his face frozen in a mask of disbelief. "It's real," he whispered. Natalie knelt beside him. "It's always been real." They sat there for nearly an hour. Natalie didn't speak. She didn't try to fill the silence. She simply sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the grass between them, like an anchor for his drifting soul. Finally, Benjamin broke the silence. "He loved the violin," he said, "but I hated it." Natalie turned to him, surprised. "I hated it because it reminded me of my mother," he said bitterly. "She used to play. She died when I was 16. Cancer. Fast. Ugly." His voice hardened. "I buried myself in science, logic, facts, built my empire on curing what couldn't be cured. But when Ethan told me he wanted to study music instead of biochemistry, I couldn't hear him." Natalie's voice was quiet. "What did you say to him?" "I told him he could play on weekends, that real men built things, they didn't play in symphonies." He looked down. 2 months later, he told me he was gay, and that he'd fallen in love." His voice cracked now. "I sent him to a recovery camp, a place that promised to correct confusion. It was run by licensed therapists. I paid top dollar." Natalie closed her eyes. "I thought I was helping him," Benjamin said. "But when he came back, he stopped playing." He stared at the stone again. 2 weeks later, he jumped from the balcony of our summer home in Vermont." Silence. Except for the wind threading through the grass. Natalie whispered, "Did he leave a note?" Benjamin reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded envelope. Trembling, he opened it. It was a single line, scribbled in dark blue ink. "Tell Dad I tried to be what he wanted, but I couldn't survive it." Natalie covered her mouth, her heart splitting open. "He never called me Dad again," Benjamin said. "Not even in dreams. But last week, when I collapsed, I swear I saw him." He looked at her, something desperate in his eyes. "And he called me Dad. In the dream, for the first time since he died." Natalie breathed in, voice thick. "Then he hasn't left you?" "Not really." They stayed until the sun began to lower behind the trees. Natalie placed the lavender gently on the grave. Benjamin traced each letter of Ethan's name with a fingertip, like a man relearning a lost language. Before they left, he turned back once more. "Ethan," he whispered, barely audible. "Daddy's here." And in that moment, a sudden wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the trees overhead. A few brown acorns dropped softly to the ground. One rolled and stopped at Benjamin's feet. He stared at it for a long time. And then, finally, he cried. Not the loud sobbing of collapse, but the quiet, aching tears of someone whose soul had waited too long to grieve. Natalie wrapped her arm around him, and for the first time in years, Benjamin Hartwell was no longer dying. He was beginning to mourn. The car ride back was quieter than the one before. Not a hollow kind of silence, but something fuller, like the silence after a storm has passed when the world is still deciding what to rebuild. Benjamin sat with his forehead lightly pressed to the window, watching the buildings of Brooklyn give way to the skyline of Manhattan. In his lap sat the folded note Ethan left behind. He hadn't let go of it since the cemetery. Natalie didn't speak. She simply sat beside him, hands resting gently on the fabric of her coat. She knew the journey they'd taken that day wasn't just to a grave. It was into a place Benjamin had spent years avoiding. The truth. When the car pulled up in front of Hartwell Tower, he didn't move, not right away. Finally, without looking at her, he said, "I don't want to go back up there." Natalie turned toward him. "Then don't." He glanced at her, puzzled. She met his eyes. "Go somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't try to pretend none of it happened." He exhaled, slow and dry. "I don't know where that is anymore." "Start with the kitchen," she said. "Make a meal. For no one. Just you." He almost smiled. Almost. Benjamin entered the penthouse that night as a stranger might enter a museum, quietly, carefully, unsure of what he was allowed to touch. He walked into the kitchen. Granite counters, steel appliances, everything spotless and soulless. He reached for a pot, rinsed it under the tap, and stood there, blinking. What had Ethan liked to eat? He tried to remember. Images flickered, incomplete. Birthday cake. Orange juice. Cereal with raisins. But no meal came to mind. No recipe he had cooked himself. He searched the pantry. Pulled out chicken stock, potatoes, dried herbs. A soup, he thought. Something simple. He chopped slowly, mechanically. The knife clacked against the board with the precision of someone trying not to feel. He added everything to the pot, turned on the stove, and waited. But the smell that filled the kitchen wasn't savory. It was acrid. He lifted the lid. Burnt. Completely. He had forgotten the flame. The bottom of the pot was black. Smoke trailed toward the ceiling vent. He turned off the heat, backed away. His chest tightened. He slid down the cabinet doors and sat on the kitchen floor. And stayed there. Curled knees, shoulders hunched, the stench of scorched broth filling the room. It wasn't about the soup. It was the helplessness. The memory he couldn't reach. The meals he never made. The songs he never listened to. The child he didn't protect. Natalie got the call at 8:46 p.m. It was from a facilities worker she barely knew. "Something triggered the smoke alarm on 58, he said. "No fire. But Mr. Hartwell hasn't answered. They're asking if you can... check?" She didn't ask why they called her instead of security. She already knew. The elevator was silent as it climbed. When the doors opened, Natalie stepped into the penthouse for the first time. It was dim. The kitchen smelled of burnt onions and guilt. The pot sat abandoned on the stove. And in the corner, on the floor, Benjamin sat, back against the cabinet, arms wrapped around himself like armor. He didn't look up when she entered. Natalie walked over, knelt beside him. "I forgot," he said hoarsely. "Forgot what?" The sound of his laugh. Natalie lowered herself onto the tile, her shoulder brushing his. She said nothing. He stared forward. "I have every voicemail he ever left, every text, photos, letters, but the sound of his laugh, I can't recall it. It's gone." He closed his eyes, jaw clenched. What kind of father forgets his own child's laugh? Natalie looked at him, her voice gentle. The kind who's never let himself listen for it. He turned to her slowly. She continued. Grief isn't a thief. It doesn't take memories. But if you bury your pain deep enough, it'll muffle the joy, too. A long pause. Then she did something unexpected. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a tiny, worn device, a voice recorder. "He played the violin in the atrium once," she said, "right before Christmas. You were at the shareholder gala. He was there early, practicing. No one else heard it. But I did." She pressed play, and suddenly, the room filled with Ethan's music. It was soft, unsure at first, the tentative notes of a teenage boy still finding his sound. But then it grew, deeper, fuller, warm, like candlelight on glass. Benjamin covered his mouth, and then, in the middle of the piece, a laugh, bright, boyish, unfiltered. A voice in the background, young, teasing. "I messed up again. One more time." Natalie pressed pause. Benjamin was shaking. "That," he whispered. "That's him." "Yes," Natalie said. He pressed his palms to his eyes, tears sliding through his fingers like something ancient cracking open. He had grieved. He had raged. But this was different. This was remembrance. Later that night, Benjamin sat at the kitchen table, Natalie across from him, and they shared the simplest thing in the world: silence. Not the silence of distance, the silence of understanding. Between them, 2 mugs of tea. Between them, a photograph of Ethan, placed upright again. Benjamin looked at it and finally said, "I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" Natalie asked. He didn't hesitate. "To live like I lost him." She looked at him gently. "And not like he was never here." The sun hadn't risen yet when Benjamin arrived at his office. For the first time in weeks, his gait was firm. He nodded to the security guard, took the elevator alone. And when he stepped into his private suite on floor 58, he did something unexpected. He opened the blinds. Light spilled into the room, drenching the gray walls in warm gold. That morning he called for a meeting. Not with shareholders, not with legal counsel, but with every janitor, maintenance worker, and night shift employee in the building. They gathered in the large auditorium on the 12th floor, looking at one another with curiosity and confusion. No one quite knew why the CEO wanted to see them. When Benjamin walked in, alone, without his assistant or press team, a hush fell over the room. He looked different, not just thinner, lighter. As if a weight had shifted from his chest to somewhere outside his body, no longer eating him from the inside out. He walked to the podium, rested his hands on the wood, and said, "I know I've been invisible to many of you, and worse, I've made you invisible to me." Murmurs rippled across the room. "But one of you reminded me that sometimes healing doesn't come from a lab or a title. Sometimes it comes from someone who sees what others refuse to look at." His eyes searched the crowd until they found her. Natalie, standing quietly near the back, her mop still tucked against the wall. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. If you have pain, you deserve to be heard. If you carry wisdom, you deserve to be trusted. And from this day forward, I will make it my mission to listen before I prescribe and to remember that no soul is too small to teach even the most educated heart how to live again. The room stood still. Natalie did not cry, but her hands, they shook, just slightly. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Hartwell Foundation office. It was unsigned. The envelope was thin, cream-colored, elegant in its silence. Inside, a printed scan of an old newspaper article and a single typed sentence. "Are you sure you know who she really is?" Benjamin stared at it for a long time. The article was dated 5 years prior. The headline read, "Unlicensed practitioner sued after death of terminally ill child." Beneath it, a photo. Natalie Brooks, younger, thinner, eyes defiant. He didn't read the rest, not yet. Instead, he walked to the window and pressed his palm to the glass. It was cold, and suddenly, so was his heart. That evening, Benjamin asked for a private background check on Natalie Brooks. He didn't want to, but he did. It arrived within 24 hours. Real name, Natalie Rivers. Legally changed in 2021 after settling a civil lawsuit filed by the parents of a 6-year-old leukemia patient. The child had died after foregoing chemotherapy, allegedly influenced by unqualified holistic recommendations given by Natalie while volunteering at a low-income clinic. The file included a quote from the mother. "She gave us hope. That was the cruelest part." Benjamin closed the folder. He felt sick. The next morning, Natalie arrived to work as usual. But as she stepped off the service elevator, a man in a gray suit intercepted her. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Hartwell won't be needing your services anymore." Natalie blinked. "What?" "I've been instructed to collect your badge and escort you off the premises." She stared at him. Then slowly she removed her name tag, placed it in his hand. No tears, just silence. As she walked toward the glass doors, the receptionist whispered, "Natalie, I'm so sorry." Natalie turned back once, just once, then left. It wasn't until late that evening that Benjamin returned to the folder. He sat on the couch, alone. The lights dimmed, and he read everything. The complaint, the lawsuit, Natalie's response. It was all there. She had advised the family to pursue parallel healing practices, herbs, music therapy, massage, never once told them to stop chemo. But the father had misunderstood. In his desperation, he took it as a cure. The child died. And grief found its target in Natalie. She had never denied speaking to the family. She had only said one thing in court. "I never promised a cure. I only promised presence." Benjamin closed the file and opened his laptop. Natalie was packing when the knock came. She'd booked a one-way ticket to Austin, Texas, to care for a terminal patient through a hospice program. It was quieter work. Work that didn't require credentials, just compassion. She opened the door. Dr. Rachel Kim stood there, Benjamin's personal psychiatrist. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Rachel smiled faintly. "I'm not here as a therapist." "Then what?" Rachel looked down. "Benjamin is unraveling again." Natalie looked away. "He made his choice." "He made a mistake," Rachel said. "And he knows it." Natalie's voice trembled, though she tried to keep it even. "He didn't ask. He didn't listen. He just assumed that I'm dangerous." Rachel stepped forward. "I reviewed the case myself. You never lied, and you never claimed to be what you weren't. You saw something no one else could. And that child, she died, loved. That counts." Natalie's voice cracked. "Not in court." "No," Rachel agreed. "But in life, it means everything." Natalie exhaled slowly. Rachel paused. "He wanted to come himself, but he didn't know if you'd slam the door." Natalie looked her straight in the eye. "I wouldn't have slammed it," she said, "but I wouldn't have opened it either." That night, Natalie sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. She wrote a letter, but she didn't send it. In it, She said everything she couldn't say out loud. I loved you, but not because you were broken. I loved you because, even in your grief, you had a kindness in your silence that made me feel less alone. But love without trust is just another wound. So I'm letting go, for your sake, and mine. She folded it, placed it in her bag, and left it there. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. The fridge was full, stocked by assistants he no longer greeted. The blinds stayed shut. The soup pot still sat on the stove, crusted in black at the bottom, like a relic of some ancient fire that had once warmed the house, but now stood cold. Benjamin sat in the chair Ethan used to curl up in, hands folded over his chest, eyes dry and wide and distant. She was gone. He'd sent her away, not with cruelty, not with raised voices, but with something sharper, with doubt. And now that doubt had turned inward, like a tide pulling everything familiar into its undertow. On the morning of the 3rd day, he collapsed in the hallway outside the elevator. No warning. One moment he was walking, or trying to. The next, he was on the floor, vision swimming, ears ringing, the cold marble tile against his cheek like stone. By the time the concierge found him, Benjamin couldn't remember his own name. He woke in Mount Sinai Hospital. Again. But this time there was no Natalie in the corner, no scent of lavender, no soft voice whispering truth into the silence. There was only beeping, fluorescent light, and a blankness that made breathing feel like something borrowed. Dr. Rachel Kim entered quietly, clipboard in hand. You're dehydrated, she said gently. Malnourished, exhausted. Benjamin didn't reply. She pulled a chair closer. The scans are normal. Again. Cardiac rhythm is irregular but not dangerous. Cortisol is off the charts. Immune system is down. She paused. You're not sick. You're not dying. Still he said nothing. Rachel looked him in the eye. But you are shutting down. He blinked once, slowly. I don't want to die, he whispered. But? I just don't want to be awake anymore. Later that night, Rachel sat in the doctor's lounge with a cup of coffee and an impossible decision. Benjamin Hartwell, one of the most powerful men in New York, was not responding to traditional care. His vitals were stable, but his spirit had receded. What she was witnessing wasn't physical collapse. It was emotional organ failure. And the only person who had ever pulled him back wasn't answering her calls. At that same moment, in a tiny rented studio in Austin, Natalie was kneeling beside a hospice bed. A frail, elderly woman was drawing her final breaths, the rise and fall of her chest as fragile as the wings of a moth. Natalie held her hand, whispered a story about rivers and light and home. When the breath stopped, Natalie closed the woman's eyes and sat there for a long time. Then, quietly, she cried. Not for the woman who had passed, but for the man who was fading somewhere far away and alone. The next morning, Natalie received an email. Subject line, "He asked for you." It was from Dr. Rachel Kim. The body of the message was short. He's not speaking, but when we mentioned your name, his heart rate changed. He's not dying, unless he chooses to. You don't owe him anything, but you should know, no one else can reach him. Natalie read it 3 times, then deleted it. She didn't reply, but she didn't sleep that night. She sat at the foot of her hospice bed, staring at her suitcase. Then she opened her journal and began to write. Forgiveness is not permission, it's recognition. I know he failed me, but I also know he's failing himself. I gave him truth, and he answered with fear. But part of me, still wants to believe that fear can be unlearned. She tore the page out, didn't send it, didn't throw it away either, just folded it, placed it inside her coat pocket, and waited for morning. At Hartwell Tower, security footage later confirmed, Benjamin left his hospital room at 3:04 a.m. No one stopped him. He signed himself out against medical advice. No shoes, just a pair of hospital slippers and a coat someone had left on a chair. He didn't take a car. He walked. All the way down Madison Avenue. Some said they saw him near the public library, standing still beneath the lion statues. Others said he was spotted outside the Met, staring up at the empty steps like they were too heavy to climb. But by 6:41 a.m., he was seen at the cemetery gates. Greenwood. A nurse later described it. He sat by Ethan's grave for hours, in the rain. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He simply sat there, like a man waiting for permission to come back to life. Natalie woke at dawn, stepped outside into a Texas morning. The air was dry, soft with sun, buzzing with cicadas. She didn't check her phone, but her fingers moved toward the coat pocket, the one with the folded note. She pulled it out, smoothed the creases, and this time she whispered the words aloud. No one else can reach him. The Austin sky was a pale watercolor when Natalie finally stood up from the foot of the hospice bed. She had been staring at the same letter for over an hour, the one she had folded and tucked into her coat pocket the night before. The edges were soft now, worn from being opened and closed too many times. She had rewritten it 3 times, still hadn't mailed it, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wasn't sure if it still mattered. Dear Benjamin, I'm not writing this for closure. There's no such thing. We carry our unfinished endings in the quiet corners of our lives, in the songs we skip, in the meals we never finish cooking, in the names we whisper but never call again. You asked me once why I didn't run, why I sat beside you when everyone else stepped back. I didn't have a clever answer then, but I do now, because someone once sat beside me when I was the one breaking. It was my mother. She didn't have insurance. She didn't have credentials. But she had a way of seeing pain that medicine missed. And she never left me alone with mine. You reminded me of her, Benjamin. Not because you were gentle, but because you were hurting and didn't know how to ask for help. I don't blame you for being afraid. I just wish you hadn't mistaken fear for betrayal. But maybe we all do that. You don't owe me anything. Not an apology, not a second chance. But if you're still sitting in silence, waiting for someone to remind you how to breathe again, here's your reminder. Breathe. Not for me, for Ethan, for the boy who believed music was enough, and for the man who still can be more than his grief. I'm not coming back, Benjamin, but I hope you find your way forward. And if you ever choose to live loudly again, I hope you hear your son's laugh in the echoes. With everything that once was true, Natalie. She folded the letter once more, sealed it, and placed it beside her coffee mug on the small kitchen table. She didn't send it. Meanwhile, in New York, Benjamin sat in a darkened conference room at Hartwell Biotech, the only light coming from a single desk lamp left on by accident. In front of him was the final draft of the company's public statement. Effective immediately, Hartwell Biotech will fund the construction of the Hartwell House for Youth Mental Health in Ethan's name, offering integrated care for grief, depression, and trauma recovery. The press release was beautifully written, but it didn't feel like enough. Benjamin leaned back. The room seemed too large, the silence too sharp. Then, as if moved by instinct, he stood. He walked out of the room, past his assistant's empty desk, past the boardroom portraits, and into the small side elevator that only went to one place, the archives. It was there he found a box labeled Employee Records, Prior Access. He pulled out a single folder. Natalie Brooks, Or rather, Natalie Rivers. Inside were notes from her time at the clinic in Queens, a volunteer log, handwritten notes from patients. One letter stood out. "Dear Miss Natalie, I don't know how to thank you for holding my daughter's hand when no one else would. The day she died, you braided her hair and told her a story about birds. She smiled. That was the last time she ever smiled. I just wanted you to know. You mattered." Benjamin read it twice, and then he wept. Not with guilt, but with recognition. Dr. Rachel Kim found him sitting there 2 hours later, the file open in his lap. "She wrote you a letter," Rachel said softly. He looked up. "She didn't send it," she continued, "but she left it on the table. One of the hospice nurses I know found it and recognized the name." Rachel handed him a copy. Benjamin's hands shook as he unfolded the pages. He read each word, then read them again. When he finished, he didn't speak. He simply whispered, "She still sees me." That night, Benjamin returned to the cemetery. There was no funeral this time. No reporters, no security, just him and Ethan, and the wind that always knew what to say when he didn't. He placed the letter Natalie had written, the original copy now in his hands, inside a small glass box and buried it just beneath the stone. Then he whispered, "She didn't come back." The wind stirred. "But I'm still here," he added, his voice trembling. He looked up, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not a grin, not a mask, but something quiet, earnest, alive. In Austin, Natalie stood at the window of her small apartment, looking up at a Texas sky just starting to break into stars. She didn't know what he had done, didn't know about the letter's burial, didn't need to. She just placed her hand on her heart and breathed in deeply, like someone who had finally let go of something she'd carried too long. Then she turned off the light and rested. The elevator chimed as it reached the executive floor. The light above the doors glowed a muted gold, casting long shadows against the polished marble walls. Benjamin Hartwell stepped out alone. No assistant, no entourage. Just a man in a navy blue sweater, jeans and shoes scuffed from walking across half of Manhattan the night before. The boardroom doors stood ahead like a vault, tall, heavy, silent. Behind them, 12 faces, some old allies, some wary investors, one former college roommate. And each one of them had been asking the same question for days. Where is Hartwell? What is he doing? And why isn't he answering to us? They didn't expect him to walk in without warning, didn't expect him to look so calm, or so alive. He stood at the head of the long table, hands in his pockets, and smiled softly, the kind of smile that said, "I've been to hell and back, and I brought back the truth." "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "before anyone speaks, I'd like a few minutes." Silence. He looked around. "You've all been patient, and I'm grateful, but I've come to tell you something that won't fit into a spreadsheet." A cough from the corner. He ignored it. "I started Hartwell Biotech to cure the world of the diseases that took my mother, my mentors, my friends. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, discovered enough, I could outsmart death itself." He paused. "And then my son died." Silence. One of the board members, a woman with sharp red glasses, shifted uncomfortably. Benjamin continued. "And after Ethan's death, I wore two faces, one for the world, polished, composed, brilliant, the other for the mirror. That one barely breathed." He moved slowly around the table. For 2 years, I let numbers speak in place of grief. I donated millions to youth mental health programs and never visited a single center. I created campaigns about emotional wellness and never opened my own mouth. He stopped near the window. Rain tapped faintly on the glass. But a woman I dismissed, a woman this company once labeled non-essential labor, sat beside me one night and told me the truth. His voice grew quiet. She said I wasn't dying of illness. I was dying of silence. Murmurs, confused glances. I let fear speak louder than compassion, and that fear made me do what this company trained me to do. Protect the asset, protect the reputation, protect the lie. He turned. I fired her. Now everyone looked up. Benjamin's jaw clenched, then softened. She had once been sued for speaking too gently to a dying child. Not because she claimed she could cure her, but because she made that family feel hope. And that scared people more than failure. He met their eyes. We punish empathy in this world, but we reward performance. He leaned in. I'm done performing. The room froze. Finally, someone spoke. Mr. Ellis, head of international investments. Benjamin, we sympathize, truly. But this company is responsible for thousands of jobs, millions in active trials, and shareholders watching your every word. Vulnerability is commendable in a memoir, not in a quarterly report. Benjamin nodded. Then let me write you a new report. He reached into his folder and pulled out a thin document. I'm establishing a new branch under Hartwell Biotech, the Ethan Initiative, a research and healing center integrating trauma therapy, neurobiology, and community care. A pause. This will be led by people who've lived what our patients are living, not just studied it. More silence. Some of them won't have degrees, but they'll have something harder to measure, the trust of those we're trying to save. One of the younger board members, a woman named Kara, leaned forward. Who's your first hire? Benjamin didn't hesitate. Natalie Brooks. A gasp from the room. Ellis raised his hand. The same woman from the lawsuit? The same woman who sat by my son's grave when I couldn't, Benjamin replied evenly, and the only person who helped me want to live again. Ellis stood up, red in the face. This is emotional thinking. Risky. Reckless. You're staking your company's name on someone who was nearly blacklisted by the public health system. Benjamin stood too, and for the first time in a long time, his voice didn't tremble. Then blacklist me too. Dead silence. 20 minutes later, Benjamin walked out of the boardroom. He didn't know if they would vote against him, didn't know if shares would fall, or if media headlines would crucify his pivot. But none of that mattered anymore, because he knew something they didn't. There are two kinds of men in this world, those who spend their lives building walls to hide behind, and those who learn, brick by brick, how to tear them down and build doors instead. Benjamin Hartwell had been both, but now he knew which man he wanted to be. That evening, he wrote a letter, not to Natalie, to Ethan. I stood in a room full of power today, son, and I told the truth, not the safe truth, the whole one. I told them about you, about the music, about the silence I wrapped myself in after you left. And I told them about her, the woman who reminded me how to feel again. They may reject what I've done. They may call it reckless. But you once called me Dad in a dream, and today, for the first time, I believe I earned that word. At the very end of the letter, he wrote one more line. Tell her I'm not asking her to come back. Just not to turn away if she sees me becoming someone better. He folded the page and put it beside Ethan's photograph. The ribbon was yellow, not gold, not corporate blue, just a simple strand of soft yellow fabric tied across the entrance of the new Hartwell House for Youth Mental Health. Benjamin had chosen the color himself, after remembering that it was Ethan's favorite shade when he was 5. It looked like the sun, Ethan once said, but softer. Now, it draped across the archway of a building born from years of pain, silence, and a letter that had never been sent. Benjamin stood in front of the crowd, no suit this time, just a white shirt, rolled sleeves, and a small photo of Ethan pinned to his chest. Journalists had gathered. So had former patients, students, teachers, nurses, grieving parents, and volunteers from the first community group Natalie had once helped in Queens. He stepped up to the microphone, paused. Let the wind speak first. Then he said quietly but clearly, "We tell children to speak up, but we rarely give them a place where their voices aren't judged, timed, or interrupted." He looked up at the name carved into the stone above the glass doors. Hartwell House. Beneath it a smaller inscription, "In memory of Ethan, and for every voice that was silenced." This building, Benjamin continued, is not a hospital. It's not a research lab. It's a promise. He turned to the crowd. A promise that healing doesn't begin with a pill. It begins with a presence. And sometimes the most powerful presence comes from the ones we overlooked the longest. The crowd fell silent. A few looked around, as if searching for someone. But Natalie wasn't there. Not in person. Though Benjamin swore, when he looked up at the second-floor window, he saw the faintest flicker of someone watching. And then, gone. 2 months earlier, the foundation had begun interviewing candidates for program directors, psychologists, social workers, PhDs. But Benjamin rejected each one, not because they weren't qualified, but because none of them had been there. None of them had sat beside a man who didn't want to live and said nothing except, "I'm here." So he made a different choice. He rewrote the job posting, removed PhD required, replaced it with, "Must have lived what they hope to help others survive." The day after the opening, Natalie received a letter. No return address. Inside, a photo of Hartwell House's dedication wall. There, etched in glass, were 4 names. Ethan Hartwell, the boy who believed music could heal. Robert Monroe, the first teen saved from suicide by the program. Sophia Kim, a formerly homeless artist who helped design the therapy rooms. Natalie Rivers, the one who sat beside the dying and stayed beneath it. This isn't a request to come back. It's a thank you for never leaving when it mattered most. Natalie pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. That weekend, Benjamin returned to Ethan's grave with a new violin. He placed it gently against the stone, under the lavender bush Natalie had planted last spring. Then he sat and read the speech he gave at the grand opening, word for word, out loud, to Ethan. He paused twice, once when he said the words, "I failed you," and once when he said, "But I'm learning to listen now." The wind moved like breath through the trees, and a single acorn fell near his foot. He smiled. Back in the city, Hartwell House filled with light. Young people came in afraid, quiet, shaking, carrying wounds they didn't yet know how to name. But they were met with music, with plants, with a hallway of mirrors that didn't judge, and with a plaque near the entrance that read, "There is no such thing as unworthy grief." One evening, as Benjamin sat in the atrium reviewing grant proposals, a boy wandered in. 16, thin, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. He didn't speak, just stared at the grand piano in the corner. Benjamin watched from across the room, then stood slowly. "Do you play?" he asked. The boy didn't respond. Benjamin nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to." The boy lingered a moment longer, then turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he asked softly, "Can I come back? Even if I don't talk yet?" Benjamin smiled. "Of course." He walked back to his desk, and for the first time he felt something that went beyond relief, or recovery, or redemption. He felt legacy. Not the kind measured in net worth, but the kind whispered in hallways, where quiet children slowly remember how to exist without apology. That night, as the staff locked up, Benjamin stood in the dark atrium, lit only by the soft glow of wall sconces. He placed a hand on the glass wall where Natalie's name had been etched, and whispered, "Look what you built." The boy's name was Noah. He was 8. Quiet. Lanky. A tangle of curls and oversized sneakers, and a voice that came out in a whisper, if at all. Benjamin first saw him sitting alone in the corner of the atrium at Hartwell House. It was raining outside. The boy's backpack dripped onto the tile floor. His sweatshirt sleeves were chewed at the cuffs. "Are you waiting for someone?" Benjamin asked. Noah looked up. His eyes were too old for his face. "No," he replied. "Not anymore." Noah had come with a caseworker. His parents had died during the worst wave of COVID. His grandmother had taken him in, but her health declined quickly. No one else stepped up. For the last 2 years, he'd been drifting between homes, schools, cities. No stable placement, no record of lasting connection, except for one thing. Everywhere he went, he carried a worn copy of The Secret Garden. Benjamin noticed it on the boy's lap, the same book Ethan used to read, curled up at the foot of the bed during thunderstorms. "I know that story," Benjamin said softly. Noah looked down. "It's not just a story." "What is it then?" "It's a place where things grow even if they've been hurt." Benjamin sat down beside him and didn't speak. He didn't need to. Weeks passed. Noah came every day after school. At first, he stayed on the periphery, sketching in the corner, watching group sessions but not joining. But slowly, something shifted. He began to ask questions. He started helping the art therapist sort supplies, and once, when he thought no one was watching, he played 3 hesitant notes on the grand piano. That was the first time Benjamin heard him laugh. It was short, small, but unmistakably real. One evening, Benjamin asked to meet Noah's caseworker. They sat in his office, the city lights flickering beyond the windows. "He doesn't talk much about his family," she said, "but he asks about yours. Often." Benjamin's hands tightened on his mug. "I lost my son," he said. "And for a long time I believed that meant I didn't deserve another." The caseworker tilted her head. "And now?" Benjamin took a breath. "Now I believe healing doesn't replace what we lost. It creates space for what still wants to be found." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Would you be open to guardianship?" The process took weeks. Background checks, home evaluations, interviews with therapists, state paperwork that stacked higher than his first medical patent application. And through it all, Noah waited, not impatiently, but with a kind of silent hope, as if afraid to believe it might actually happen. Then one morning, Benjamin knelt beside him in the atrium and said, "There's no paperwork in the world that can promise we'll get it right. But I want to try. If you're ready, I'd like to bring you home." Noah looked at him. Just looked. Then whispered, "Will it be like the garden?" Benjamin's voice caught. "It will be messy. But yes, things will grow." Noah nodded once. That was enough. The adoption was finalized 6 weeks later. Noah chose his new last name himself, Noah Rivers Hartwell. "To keep Natalie's," he said, "and yours, like roots and branches." Benjamin didn't correct him, just pulled him into a long, quiet hug. Natalie, watching from a corner of the room, smiled through tears. Later that day, Benjamin found Natalie outside near the newly planted garden behind Hartwell House. Lavender, sage, wildflowers, and one young tree, still staked upright, still learning to stand. "I want you to name it," he said. She turned. "What?" "The tree. It's yours." She smiled. "Why not name it Ethan?" He shook his head. "He's already everywhere here. I want this one to be someone you choose." Natalie thought for a long moment, then said softly, "Then name it Noah." Because it came after the storm. Because it promised something new. That spring, they all visited Greenwood together. The three of them, Benjamin, Natalie, and Noah. They brought 2 violins, one small, one full-sized, and a picnic blanket. They read The Secret Garden aloud by Ethan's grave, page by page. Noah made it to chapter 3 before falling asleep on Natalie's lap. Benjamin watched them both, the woman who had saved his life and the boy who had given it back its meaning, and felt something he hadn't dared to name in years. Family. Not a replacement, not a redemption, just presence. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Natalie turned to him and asked, "Do you still hear Ethan?" Benjamin smiled. "All the time. He's louder now. It's like I gave him permission to stay." "And what does he say?" Benjamin looked up at the wind in the branches. "He says, 'You made it, Dad.'" Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. Some wounds can't be healed with medicine. Sometimes it takes presence, trust, and one steady hand that refuses to let go, to bring someone back from the edge. If you saw a part of yourself in this story, someone who has waited to be heard, or someone who offered kindness when no one else would, thank you. In a world that rushes past pain, your gentleness matters. Don't forget to subscribe for more healing stories like this one. We're here to tell the quiet, beautiful truths for hearts that still believe in light. See you in the next story.